The polished wood felt cool against my fingertips, a stark contrast to the heat flooding my face. I stood in the hallway, the same hallway where I'd kissed him goodbye 1,000 mornings, the same hallway where our children had left their muddy footprints, now silent, empty. The space above the console table was bare. An absent rectangle of slightly cleaner paint marked where our wedding photo had hung for 20 years. Below it, another ghost outline where the framed picture of the kids on their first day of school used to beam. All gone. Every single photo of me, of us, of our family, wiped from the walls like we had never existed. I am standing in the skeletal remains of my life, the air thin with a metallic tang of betrayal and fresh paint. Dust motes dance in the single shaft of light slicing through the grand, indifferent window. This house, the home we built, the walls that held our laughter and our arguments and our quiet evenings, now feels like a stranger's shell. He didn't just leave. He performed an exorcism. He scrubbed me out. This is where the story begins, I suppose, though the truth is, it began long before I found the bare patches on the wall. It began in the silences that grew between us like weeds, in the way his eyes started looking past me instead of at me, in the carefully casual mentions of his new colleague, Scarlett. But finding the walls naked, that was the moment the abstract dread solidified into concrete, crushing reality. He wasn't just leaving me, he was erasing me, preparing the canvas, I see now, for something else, someone else. If this story hits close to home, or if you've ever felt erased, tell me in the comments. I read all of them, and if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know, bringing these stories to life. The initial days bled into weeks, a blur of cold legal documents and colder interactions. He was ruthlessly efficient. His lawyer was a shark, circling, always pushing for more, offering less. He wanted the house, the bulk of the savings, my quiet disappearance. He framed it as practicalities, necessary steps. I saw it for what it was, a final power play, a demonstration of his control, a desire to leave me with nothing. I fought back, of course. With shaking hands and a raw throat, I hired my own lawyer, a quiet woman with fierce eyes who didn't say much, but listened intently. We began the slow, exhausting dance of negotiation, proposal, rejection, counterproposal. Each email, each phone call, a fresh stab wound. He held all the cards, or so it seemed. He had the income, the assets, the narrative he was already spinning to our mutual friends, the one where I was suddenly difficult or unreasonable. I was the emotional wreck, the one left behind, scrabbling for footing. He was the one moving on, embracing a vibrant new chapter. The world, or at least our small part of it, seemed inclined to believe him. It's amazing how quickly loyalty shifts when money and social standing are involved. The isolation was profound. Calls stopped coming. Dinner invitations dried up. I was contagious with failure. My first apartment was small, anonymous. Cardboard boxes stacked like gravestones around me. The silence was deafening after 2 decades of a busy house. Every creak of the floorboards was amplified. Every passing siren felt personal. I tried to make it a home, unpacking books, lighting candles, but the air felt temporary, provisional. My identity had been so deeply entwined with us, with him, with that house, that shedding it felt like shedding my skin, leaving me raw and vulnerable. I went through the motions of living, going to work, buying groceries, forcing myself to eat, but it felt like I was watching someone else's life through a thick pane of glass. Sleep offered little escape. My dreams were haunted by echoes of happier times, twisting into nightmares of his betrayal. He would call sometimes, usually about logistics, his voice flat, devoid of warmth. Each call was a fresh indignity, a reminder of the chasm between us, of how little he cared. I felt small, insignificant, a casualty he was tidying away. I remember one call specifically. He needed some obscure document from the house, tucked away in a filing cabinet in the study. He insisted I retrieve it immediately. His tone brooked no argument. I explained I was across town, it wasn't urgent. Couldn't it wait? He scoffed. I need it now. Don't be difficult, that phrase again. Scarlett's here. We're sorting through things, Scarlett. In my house. Sorting through things. The casual cruelty of it stole my breath. It wasn't just the document. It was the deliberate insertion of her name, a calculated twist of the knife. I hung up, shaking. He was colonizing my past with her presence. The legal battle dragged on, a slow, draining war of attrition. His side employed every tactic: delay, obfuscation, intimidation. My savings dwindled, eaten up by legal fees. The small apartment began to feel less like a temporary stop and more like a cage. He pushed for mediation, acting reasonable, magnanimous even, while his proposals chipped away at everything I had built, everything I was entitled to. He seemed to grow stronger, more confident, fueled by his new relationship, his apparently successful life. Scarlett's name started appearing in society columns, linked to his. They were seen at events, smiling, a golden couple. The photos in magazines online were a constant, sickening reminder. Her face, bright and confident, next to his, looking younger, happier than he had in years. My friends who had initially offered support started to distance themselves. It was uncomfortable, I suppose. They didn't want to take sides. Or maybe they simply preferred the winning side, the side with the sprawling house and the yacht and the endless stream of champagne. I felt like I was drowning, the waves of despair crashing over me, pulling me under. Then came the eviction notice. Not from my small apartment, but from my history. From the house. He finally got his way in the interim agreement. I had to vacate permanently within 2 weeks. 2 weeks to pack up 2 decades. To sift through the ruins, decide what little I could take, and leave the rest. It felt surreal, walking through the rooms, the air heavy with ghosts. The living room where we'd spent countless evenings, the kitchen where I'd cooked a million meals, the bedroom that held so many intimate moments, now just rooms, stripped of their meaning. I saw the bare patches on the walls again, the stark white outlines against the faded paint. They hadn't been repainted yet. Just empty spaces, waiting. He was already living there, of course. And she was there too. I could smell her perfume, faintly, a scent that was both generic and utterly alien in this familiar place. Her things were already there, displacing mine. A bright scarf draped over a chair, a stack of magazines I'd never read, a different brand of coffee in the kitchen. Each item a tiny, sharp intrusion. Packing was an exercise in emotional brutality. Every object held a memory, a weight. Our children's drawings, now faded. Gifts from anniversaries long past. Letters exchanged when we were young and foolish, and so full of hope. I sorted through them, a archaeologist excavating a lost civilization. Most went into boxes labeled discard. It was too painful to keep it all, too heavy. I kept only the essentials, the practical things, and a small, carefully curated box of irreplaceable memories. Photos that hadn't been on the walls, my grandmother's tea set, a collection of old concert ticket stubs. When the moving truck pulled away, the house felt even emptier, more hollow than before. I drove away, watching it recede in the rearview mirror, a lump the size of a stone in my throat. That chapter was closed, slammed shut. A few weeks later, I was back in the neighborhood for an appointment. On a whim, a morbid curiosity I couldn't resist, I drove past the house. It looked different. Brighter paint on the trim, new landscaping, a different car in the driveway, a flashy red one that screamed, "New money. Look at me." And then I saw it. Through the large front window, clearly visible from the street, were new pictures on the wall above the console table. Large, modern frames. And in them, Scarlett. Smiling, posing. Her face, her life, now filling the spaces where mine had been. There was a large portrait of her, sleek and professional-looking. Next to it, a candid shot of her laughing, her head thrown back. And another, of her and Robert, arms around each other, beaming, looking utterly content. They hadn't just filled the space, they had ostentatiously claimed it. It wasn't just a house anymore, it was their stage, and they were starring in the sequel, with me written out of the script. Seeing her photos on my wall, it was a physical blow. It stole the air from my lungs. It wasn't just about the pictures. It was about the blatant disrespect, the triumphant appropriation of my history, my home. It was a declaration: we won. You are gone. This is ours now. The bare walls had felt like an ending, a sad, empty space. But seeing her there, in bright, glossy prints, was worse. It was an active erasure, a statement of replacement. I drove away numb, a cold, hard knot forming in my stomach. This wasn't just about a marriage ending anymore. This was about dignity, about self-worth, about the very right to exist in the memory of a place you helped create. They thought they had won. They thought I was finished. They thought I would just fade away into my small apartment and my quiet, defeated life. They were wrong. Seeing her face on that wall, in those frames, turned the cold knot in my stomach into a burning ember. This wasn't just about getting divorced anymore. This was war. The shift was instantaneous and profound. The despair lifted, replaced by a cold, clear resolve. The tears stopped. The shaking hands steadied. I had been grieving the loss of a life, a future I thought was secure. Now, I saw that future was a lie, built on a foundation of sand and deceit. They had taken everything: the house, the money, the friends, the narrative. But they hadn't taken my mind. They hadn't taken my history. And, crucially, they hadn't taken my knowledge. Living with Robert for 2 decades meant I knew things. Not just his favorite food or the way he snored. I knew his habits, his vulnerabilities, his secrets. I knew how he operated, the corners he cut, the risks he took. He was arrogant. He believed his own hype. He thought he was untouchable. Scarlett, in her glittering naivete, seemed to amplify his worst tendencies, basking in his reflected glow, oblivious to the rot beneath the surface. I started small. I dug out an old external hard drive I'd kept from before, our shared cloud storage. It contained years of old files, photos, documents, emails from earlier in his career, before he became so guarded. Most of it seemed innocuous, but I was looking for patterns, inconsistencies. I remembered things he'd said in passing, stressed about late at night, quickly dismissed. A business trip to Switzerland that seemed overly complicated. A sudden influx of cash explained away as a shrewd investment. The names of people he dealt with who seemed shifty. I cross-referenced everything with public records, news articles, financial reports I could access online. It was painstaking, tedious work, like assembling a mosaic from a million tiny, shattered pieces. I worked late into the night, fueled by black coffee and a simmering anger that kept me sharp and focused. Sleep was still elusive, but now it was because my mind was racing with possibilities, not spiraling into despair. I also started observing, not just driving by the house, but subtly checking online footprints. Scarlett was less careful than Robert. Her social media, while curated, offered glimpses into their life, their routines, where they went, who they saw. Her photos on the wall, the ones I'd seen from the street, were also posted online, a whole album dedicated to making our house a home. Each picture of her smiling face, strategically placed in my old rooms, felt like a personal provocation. She was so proud of their new life, so eager to show it off. She had no idea what she was standing on, or who she was dealing with. Robert, too, was active online, though more cautious. Business posts, networking events, carefully worded updates about his success. His image was everything. He cultivated an aura of respectability, integrity, old money success, even though he came from nothing. That manufactured image was his shield. It was also his greatest vulnerability. The more I dug, the more a picture began to emerge. It wasn't just simple infidelity. It was something far more complex and far more dangerous. Robert had built his recent success on a foundation of creative accounting, shell companies, offshore accounts, deals that skirted the edges of legality, if not outright crossed them. The trip to Switzerland wasn't just a vacation. It was about setting up something hidden. The shrewd investment was likely laundered money. He wasn't just a cheating husband. He was a con artist, a fraudster, using his charm and his carefully constructed image to deceive not just me, but his business partners, his investors, maybe even the tax authorities. And Scarlett, by being publicly associated with him, by living in that house and filling it with her photos, was becoming inextricably linked to his deception. She was the smiling face of his lie. The deepest point of the crisis wasn't just seeing her photos on the wall. It was the realization of the sheer scale of his deceit, the danger he posed, and the terrifying isolation I felt knowing all of this. I was just one woman against a man with resources, connections, and a complete lack of conscience. He wouldn't hesitate to crush anyone who got in his way. The thought of confronting him directly was terrifying. He was capable of anything. I felt a chilling fear wrap around me. What if I was wrong? What if he found out I was investigating? What if he turned his considerable power against me? I was already financially precarious, emotionally fragile. One wrong move could shatter me completely. The temptation to just walk away, to bury my head in the sand, to try and build a new life far away from his toxic orbit was overwhelming. It would be safer. It would be easier. But then I thought of those bare patches on the wall, and her smiling face replacing mine, and the cold, hard core of anger solidified again. He wouldn't get away with it. Not if I could stop him. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I found it tucked away in an old email thread, buried deep within the hard drive. A seemingly innocuous exchange between Robert and his lawyer from years ago, discussing options for asset protection and minimizing tax exposure. One line, a single sentence, mentioned a specific type of trust based in a very particular jurisdiction known for its secrecy, and referenced a deed related to the property, not a property. The property. Our house. It clicked into place. The shrewd investment, the Swiss trip, the shell companies. He hadn't just bought the house. He'd structured its ownership, or significant interests related to it, through complex, hidden legal structures, likely designed to evade taxes, hide assets, or launder money. The house wasn't just a home. It was a key piece of his illicit financial architecture. This wasn't just about divorce settlements anymore. This was about serious financial crime. And he had brought Scarlett into it, making her the visible occupant of a potentially compromised asset. By removing my photos and putting up hers, he wasn't just making a symbolic statement. He was inadvertently drawing attention to the present occupants of a place tied to his illegal activities. He was erasing his legitimate past, me, our family photos, and installing his illegitimate present, Scarlett, her photos, in a location that was, in the eyes of the law, a potential crime scene or a target for asset forfeiture. The irony was so sharp, it almost made me laugh. He thought he was wiping the slate clean, but he was actually highlighting the very thing he needed to keep hidden. My strategy crystallized. I wouldn't confront him. I wouldn't even threaten him. I would use his own actions, his arrogance, and his carefully constructed public image against him. I had the pieces now. The evidence of the fraudulent structures, the links to the offshore accounts, the timing of the transactions that coincided with the investments, and I had the leverage of the house, now occupied by Scarlett, a symbol of his new life, sitting squarely in the middle of his old crimes. My plan wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about justice. It was about exposing a predator. And yes, it was about a cold, deep satisfaction in watching his meticulously built world crumble. I wouldn't just survive his destruction. I would dismantle him using the very tools he thought made him invincible. The plan took months to execute, requiring patience, precision, and a willingness to dive deeper into a world of financial malfeasance I never knew existed. I organized the evidence meticulously. Emails, bank records, accessed through surprisingly simple means once I knew where to look, thanks to old passwords he'd carelessly left lying around years ago, property deeds, trust documents, public records of the shell companies. It was a mountain of data, dry and technical, but pulsing with the truth of his lies. I didn't understand all the financial jargon, but my lawyer did. And she knew exactly who would. I didn't go to the police immediately. His reach was too long, his influence too great. There was a risk he could bury it, twist the narrative, or worse. I needed the exposure to be undeniable, public, and delivered with maximum impact. I contacted an investigative journalist, known for his work on white-collar crime. He was initially cautious, skeptical. He'd heard it all before, disgruntled exes with axes to grind. But I didn't come with emotion and accusations. I came with files. With dates, account numbers, names of companies and trusts. With hard, verifiable data. I showed him the documentation related to the house, the complex web of ownership structures, the timing that matched suspiciously with certain large, unexplained deposits. I showed him the evidence of the shell companies and the offshore accounts in jurisdictions known for secrecy. I showed him the pattern. He stopped being skeptical. He became interested. Very interested. We worked together discreetly. I provided the information. He did the legwork, confirming details, tracing the money trails, building the case with rock-solid facts. We agreed on the timing. It had to be impactful. It had to hit him when he felt most secure, most triumphant. We watched his public schedule. He was planning a major event, a gala to launch a new foundation he was heading, a move designed to boost his image further, cement his respectability. And the location? The house. Our house. Now their house. The perfect stage for his ultimate deception. And the perfect stage for his downfall. The journalist would release the story, a detailed exposé with all the ugly facts, online, and simultaneously provide the evidence to the relevant authorities, financial regulators, maybe even the FBI. The timing had to be precise. The moment his guests were arriving, his face was beaming, his carefully constructed world was on full display. The day arrived. Sunny, deceptively normal. The society pages had breathlessly reported on the upcoming gala, the guest list, the opulence of the venue. Scarlett had posted photos of the preparations, the marquees going up on the lawn, the caterers setting up, the flower arrangements. And, of course, more photos of her on the walls, now including shots of her in glamorous gowns, perfect for a gala invite. The stage was set. My hands were clammy, but my mind was clear. There was no going back. I was in a small cafe downtown, miles away, watching the news feeds, monitoring the journalist's website. The first indication was a ripple, then a wave. A notification pinged on my phone, a headline from a major financial news outlet. Then another and another. The story was breaking. Prominent businessman Robert, his last name, implicated in multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. Investigation launched into his name. Financial dealings. Offshore accounts linked to gala host. It was happening. The journalist had delivered. The carefully sourced, undeniable truth was being unleashed. Simultaneously, I knew the authorities would be receiving their packages of evidence. My phone rang. It was my lawyer, her voice tight with controlled excitement. It's out. They're already getting calls. Regulators, reporters. It's big. I hung up, my heart pounding, a strange mix of elation and nausea churning within me. I imagined the scene at the house. The arriving guests, the polite chatter, the clinking of champagne glasses. Robert, smiling, shaking hands, basking in the glow of his fabricated success. And then someone's phone rings. Someone checks a news alert. A whisper starts. Spreads. The smiles freeze. The chatter dies down. All eyes turn to him. The mask cracks. And then I got the call I was waiting for. Not from Robert. Never from Robert. From someone who was there, someone who owed me a favor, someone with a ringside seat. They described the scene unfolding. The confusion, the shock, the rapid departure of guests. They described Robert's face turning ashen as he was shown the news on a phone screen. The shouting. The sheer, unadulterated panic. And then they described it. The moment that would forever be etched in my mind. As his world imploded, as the sirens began to wail faintly in the distance, as the reporters started gathering at the gates, Robert stood in the grand hallway, the very place where the walls were adorned with Scarlett's triumphant photos. The source on the phone said he looked up, his eyes wild, his face contorted not just with fear of exposure, but with a raw, personal agony. He saw Scarlett's smiling face staring back at him from the frames, symbols of the life he had built on lies, the life that was now collapsing in spectacular fashion. And he screamed. Not a scream of pain, or even just of anger. A primal, guttural sound of utter, total defeat. A scream born of watching everything he valued, money, status, reputation, control, vanish in an instant. The source said he screamed, looking from the phone in his hand, delivering the news of his ruin, to Scarlett's photos on the wall, symbols of the arrogant lie that had just been exposed. He screamed again, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony and rage, and he lunged at the wall, tearing at one of the frames holding Scarlett's grinning face. The source hung up quickly after that, afraid to be seen witnessing his breakdown. He screamed at Scarlett's photos on the wall because they were a monument to his lie, a lie I had just irrevocably exposed. He had taken down my photos, symbols of the legitimate life he discarded, to put up hers, symbols of the fraudulent life he embraced. And in that moment of ultimate ruin, seeing her triumphant face staring back at him from the walls of the house that was now evidence, the house that was the epicenter of his collapse, it wasn't just my revenge. It was the universe's cold, harsh justice, delivered through the very image he had used to erase me. My photos were gone, but my truth was back on the walls, written in headlines, shouted from the rooftops, undeniably present in the ruin I had orchestrated. He screamed because I wasn't erased. I was everywhere. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The Foundation Gala dissolved into chaos. Authorities arrived, questions were asked. The house was eventually seized as part of the investigation into his assets. Robert was arrested. The details that emerged publicly were even worse than I had initially suspected. Years of systematic fraud, cheating business partners, defrauding investors, using complex structures to hide billions. The house was just one piece of a much larger, uglier puzzle. Scarlett, it turned out, was either incredibly naive or willfully blind. She wasn't charged, but her reputation was irrevocably tarnished, her face forever linked in the public eye to a spectacular downfall. She disappeared from the social scene as quickly as she had arrived. Her photos, I imagine, were taken down in haste, not by me, not by her, but by the cold hand of the law, or perhaps just left among the debris of a life built on lies. I didn't get the house back. That was never the point, not really, not after I understood what it truly represented. It was evidence now, tainted by his crimes. The divorce settlement became secondary to the criminal proceedings. While he faced prison and financial ruin, I was able to negotiate a more equitable outcome, recovering a portion of the assets that weren't tied up in his illicit schemes, enough to secure my future, to finally feel stable. More importantly, I recovered myself. The woman who had been erased from the walls was back. Stronger, clearer, stripped of illusions. Standing now, months later, in my own small, quiet apartment, I look around at the few photos I've carefully chosen to display. Pictures of my children, growing and thriving despite the turmoil. A photo of me with friends who stood by me. A landscape from a trip I took, alone, a journey of rediscovery. There are no photos of him. No photos of the life we had. Those memories are here, inside me, but they no longer define me in the same way. They are part of the story, the difficult, painful middle, but not the end. The bare patches on the wall in that house are likely painted over now. Scarlett's glamorous photos are probably packed away in a box somewhere, or discarded. The stage is empty, but the story lives on. Robert is paying the price for his deceit. Scarlett is a ghost of the life she almost had. And I am here, rebuilt, stronger, with a quiet confidence that comes from facing the worst and finding the strength to not just survive, but to dismantle the forces that sought to destroy me. He took my photos off the wall, thinking he was erasing me. But in the end, it was his image, his life, his carefully constructed reality that shattered, leaving behind the indelible mark of the truth I revealed. And that, I suppose, is a picture worth 1,000 words. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt the sting of betrayal or the quiet power of reclaiming your own narrative, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment below with where you're listening from and what time it is. And thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these stories to life.